Hi, Kathryn. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to chit chat with you a little bit about just your experiences as a therapist. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathryn Tarner. When I went to grad school, I was obviously a different last name, but I've been doing this for almost 15 years. I graduated back in 2011. I've always been one of those people who loved kids, loved people. I'm nosy by nature. I like to get to know people. So speech was a perfect fit for me. I babysat all throughout my teen years. Always loved helping families, kind of seeing how families work. So when I started at Boston University, I started taking classes about speech. It continued to fascinate me. Went right on to my master's in Texas. And I'm a jack of all trades. I've been in most clinical settings over these past 15 years, but I've always gravitated towards early childhood. So that's sort of my specialization over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. But I've done the full gamut. I've worked in hospitals, I've worked in nursing homes, clinics, private practices, and I'm now currently at a private preschool in the New York area. But I did about 10 years in inner city Philadelphia for early intervention before moving back to New York, where I'm originally from. So that's a really shortened version of sort of my career, but always just driven by a passion for people.
Right, that's really awesome. So you have a lot of experience having just all these different settings that you've worked in different age groups. It's really fascinating. So I want to talk a little bit about your experience in early childhood. So this was basically a state funded program that you were working for, correct?
Yes, in Philadelphia. So it was all through the early intervention entity through the state, but they're localized by county there. So I would get cases basically. I independent contracted for a number of agencies, and I would basically get cases assigned. And then it was basically on me to, do all planning with the family, setting up services, talking to other professionals on the team. But I just found it a positive experience overall in terms of supporting the therapist, supporting the family. And I really loved that work. I did that for almost 10 years. Just felt very supported by my local municipality to give those services.
Wow. So you were going into families' homes.
Yeah, basically natural environment. So it could be the home, it could be the daycare, it could be grandma's home if that's where the child was during the day. I would sometimes attend doctor's appointments of children if that supported the family in terms of just making the services work for the child. It was very developmentally focused and a very good experience.
Wow, that's great. So talk to me about the types of kids on your caseload. Was it primarily, did you have children that you suspected maybe were going to be on the spectrum, or was it more intellectually disabled children? Tell me about that, what you
Yeah.
had.
Absolutely. It was a full gamut, I would say. Very, very, very culturally diverse full gamut. But I ran into children that, were seeking genetic testing early that did come up with a genetic diagnosis, families that were just navigating the possibility of neurodivergence, and as well as just, maybe some language, concerns, but, didn't necessarily warrant autism, but just needed support. I also found that basically kids had good access to services in Philadelphia. It was very family supportive, meaning that they drove the process and parent concern could be a large part of the voice. Whereas when I moved back to New York, I realized that it wasn't so much the nature of accessing services. It wasn't as family friendly, and that was a huge shock to me because after spending so much time in a very parent driven, family focused system, it was much different coming back to a space where just a little bit more academic, pushing, testing and not as much parent voice, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Tell me why do you think that is? Why do you think there's such a difference? Do you think it's the state difference or the program difference?
Yes, I do. I do think it's like who's running it. I think there's a lot more fluidity in early childhood in the state of Pennsylvania. And it really, I guess for me, I'm a very rose-colored glass half full person. I didn't realize, how different it could be in other states. The reason I came back to New York was personal for my own family. So I didn't really do a ton of research before, moving mid-pandemic. I was just like, I'm good at what I do. Early intervention is great. It supports kids early. I'm so excited to continue doing that. And it was just not that way when I moved back a couple of years ago. And I think that's why I mentioned to you, I started at that nonprofit because there's just a lot of work that New York State needs to do to get back to a good place for early childhood. And I was just a little disillusioned and shocked at the differences. That the desire is there to help kids, but the underlying systematic levels are just creating a lot of barriers for these families, and that's devastating as a therapist who knows and that these interventions and this information can be life changing.
Right. So in the school that you work for, is it a private school or a public school?
So it is a nonprofit based school. So it's nonprofit, but it basically they do get some streamlines of funding from the Department of Education and things like that to service the children. But New York sort of because out of these early childhood ecosystems, when things don't develop, you know, in a friendly way manner for families, people are going to fill in gaps where they need to, and so there's a lot of just different landscape in New York based off of the needs of families that are just not being covered by these systems. Like you said, it was fully funded in Philadelphia, and it is funded in New York. There's just different barriers.
Wow. So in the school that you are supporting now, talk to me about how do you support with parents or how do you work with parents even though it's in like an academic type setting? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it is more limiting. Obviously, there isn't that constant line of communication that I had in EI that was so affiliate that was so flexible. But we do have like a communication system that the school sets up where I can like consistently message families and talk, and I'm always willing to set up meetings and things. But a school, based on the therapy that you do, that obviously that you showcase on Instagram and everything, that's going to be more challenging. But I just have to be more creative when working with the child. And I still do a good job, but it's just, again, like another form of barrier that we talked about. So I know I could be doing a better job if I reach these kids' families, but right now in the system I'm in, it's just not allowing me. And unfortunately, we could talk, about money. The money is a factor, and early intervention in New York is also struggling so badly because reimbursement rates have been cut twice in the last, I would say, 15, 20 years, and therapists are now getting paid less than they got in the 90s. So who's going to do a job in New York City when it's so expensive that where they're not getting paid? So these 4410s that I speak of, which are these more like special ed preschools that have kind of come out of this issue with policy are basically dominant here. So like you're not getting that parent involvement because they're placing it more in the education system when the early intervention system is not being supported from birth to three, if that makes sense.
Oh, wow. So, okay, parents, do you find that parents who have these kids in these programs of school, like what you work in, do they kind of feel like do they understand the importance of being involved and learning how to support their child, or is that kind of something that you find more of in an early childhood type of like ECI, like early childhood intervention? Do you find that parents are more willing to learn in like the home environment or the daycare setting versus in a school setting?
Yeah, so that is a good question. I do think that parents learn better in natural moments just like children do. And so I do think that early intervention in naturalistic settings breeds more involvement naturally. Like obviously you're going to have your disengaged parents. There's factors that underlie that, just like parental stress, in the pandemic is like you could want to help your kid as much as you want, but if you're struggling financially or emotionally yourself, it's obviously very hard to support your child. But yeah, the school is like you're already like having another barrier. You want to engage the parent, but they're not there in the moment. So maybe it's more difficult to do, I would say. Yeah. Or get that buy-in.
Right. I know that here in Texas, a lot of parents, they think, okay, if I send my child to school, then my child's going to get the support they need and everything's going to be okay. And they're going to develop and they're going to grow. And, they're sending 3-year-olds to school and they're really focusing a lot on letters and numbers and teaching the child to sit and all of these kind of structured things. And when I work with parents, I have to kind of talk to them about, oh, the foundational stuff that's all needed before the child can really be successful at those things. Um, and so I mean, it might be a nationwide problem where we're kind of pushing these littles to go to school and parents in their mind are just thinking, okay, that's the best thing for my child because school is going to help them, but they're lacking so much of that. In the setting that you work in, do is it more of like academic type of therapy that you have to give, or are you able to work on some of those foundational communication skills?
So that's a great question. It is a traditional ABA school because that is what the teachers are adhering to. In terms of my therapy, I'm more free range. Like I get to be a free range therapist, but obviously that becomes, a barrier in itself because I'm trying to educate the teachers and they have their own model. But as a therapist, I have to say that I have, unlimited capacity to sort of connect and do what works for my kids. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Great. That's really great. How many kids are on your caseload?
16 currently, usually it fluctuates between 15 and 18, but they're mostly, I would say, at this point, probably about two-thirds are nonverbal,
Okay. So
non-speaking.
at this school, you are the only SLP?
There's 8.
Eight.
And we are considered related service providers in New York, which I was doing some research before this discussion, and I didn't realize how different even New York State versus Pennsylvania view speech only disabilities. So, in New York State, when you get to that level of 3, they really push that the child has to be, fully immersive in special education to qualify. So, you're not really getting those speech only kids who might need a little bit more instruction to survive in a classroom. And so I thought that that was very interesting, where it seemed like PA had a more developmental focused intervention system for even 3 to 5, whereas New York is very academic based and like you have to be like fully special ed. And that's where these 4410 preschools came from. Which to your point, I do agree that a lot of these kids are showing up to these places and just not ready for what they're throwing at them. And can some kids do it and be okay? Sure, but some kids are going to have trauma from this, and we're learning that through the internet and autistic voices later in life. And that is a big passion of mine, just advocacy for kids that are different or don't fit inside the box early. So that's where a lot of my interests lie as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I remember when I worked in public school and we would get 3, 4-year-olds that were just diagnosed as speech impaired,
Mhm.
but there was obviously something else going on. But we, at this point, this was, 2010 probably, we were trying to switch things. The speech department at the district that I worked at, we were trying to switch things because they were really utilizing these kids as speech impairment with that special education criteria, and they were pushing them into these life skill classes because they knew they needed more help, but the only diagnosis they had was a speech impairment. And they
Right.
were doing that because they weren't up for reeval and they didn't want to have to reevaluate them, but they could push them into that service because they automatically qualified because of the speech impairment label. And around that time when I was in the district, we were trying to clean house a little bit, where we were taking these kids and setting up a reevaluation to figure out if there's something else going on, because a child with just a speech impairment should not be sitting in a life skills type of
No,
class.
something doesn't add up there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that, like I said, that was probably around 2010. And I know that, now I don't think that's allowed anymore. I don't work in public school anymore, but I'm assuming, that's changed just because that was happening when I was there. But it's just so interesting, like how you can kind of move around the system to be able to support a child, but are you really supporting them the best of their ability when you don't even really have a full evaluation to understand the child's development?
And that's where I go back to those critical services 0 to 3 are so important because that's where you're making the most lasting change and you're getting the buy in of the family. I don't know why we're not really holistically investing in that, or at least creating providers that are aware of the importance. It boggles my mind. I mean, PA was doing it well. I'm sure there's always things you could fix, but to me, it was just very interesting going from one to the other and having that experience and being able to bring my knowledge. But we don't need more research showing us that earlier is better, and that giving this information to families, empowering them. I mean, I love the stories that you share about your cousin and everything, and everyone can pick the path that they want, but if you don't have the access or the resources, education, then that's not even a choice on the table. So
Right. I agree. I think that, I mean, even doctors, like I have some little ones and they have not been diagnosed with autism yet, but I mean, it's pretty evident. But the doctor, the actual pediatrician is like, oh, give him some more time.
Wait
But
and see, the
by
good
the
old wait
time
and see.
you give them more time, she's going to be 3 years old and she won't even be able to get any kind of early childhood services. And thankfully, she comes from a family that can afford, outside type of therapy, but that's not the case for every child.
Or even research other means of
Right.
therapy, right?
Right.
Sometimes we're just a cog in the wheel and we're only as good as the information our doctor is giving us. So I'm good for that family for researching you and more means to get support for their child.
Right. I really feel like if we as a nation did more to support the early providers of children, like pediatricians, then
Or even quality ECEs where people are well trained.
yeah, then you really can benefit the whole family because these parents are getting support and they're getting the knowledge. I mean, because the average parent, they aren't expecting to just have a child that has any kind of delays. Being a parent in general is hard. They don't come with books. But imagine having challenges and going to your pediatrician and asking them what their opinion. They're like, oh, well, it's just fine, just kind of wait it out a little bit more. But by that time, they've missed so much of that critical area of development. I agree. I think that policy has to change. I think there has to be more awareness for those early years. Otherwise, it just causes so much later on down the road in the systems that we have in place to not be effective.
Yeah, and I just think that, like you said, parents are the main driver in the early years, and if we're not including them in these systems to like, how I mentioned in New York, that parent, involvement and, concerns aren't really part of the evaluation package. Like, what are we missing then? And in terms of just population, I looked up some numbers, and about 10% of 0 to 3 year old kids in PA are being flagged within the early intervention system and a part of it. And New York's a bigger state, and it's about 5% of the kids are utilizing the system. So it's like that just tells you in general, the need might be there, but we're not really capturing all these kids and we're not giving them the appropriate services early. And we know that that can just lead to more money spent down the road or more headaches or having to work around these systems, as you mentioned in Texas, having to classify these kids differently. And so it just became something that I'm interested in through sort of just moving and my own experiences. But I'm still that person who, wherever I am, I'm going to be giving my students and my clients, my families, the best of me. I'm going to always work within the parameters that I have, but it's still interesting to be talking about, and there needs to be more awareness. And more voices being loud so that people understand that we're missing these critical windows and that we should have more uniformity in how we tackle these problems.
Right. I completely agree. I think it's important because us as therapists and professionals, and we go into this work because we are passionate about helping children and families, obviously. And the more that we can talk about it and the more that we can advocate and go to the Capitol or go to your state's legislation and, really advocate for these things, it's really what it takes. But I think it seems like, I know for me, when I think about doing something like that, I'm like, gosh, it seems like so hard, to be able to get a lawmaker that has no experience with children's development, to understand the importance of this, and so you feel so, like for me, I feel so small. Like, how can one person, but I think working together with everybody, if we all, like you said, get loud and use our voice, then over time that becomes really the voice that's heard. So it can benefit these families because, I mean, really, these
Same thing
lawmakers.
with how you share your story, though, honestly. I mean, even though you're not marching on the Capitol, you're sharing your story. And people's stories are impactful, and that's where the change comes from. I mean, even just me, like, if I didn't share my information on how starkly different the systems are, people just kind of live with what they know. And, so like we have to get loud sometimes because otherwise we don't really know there's a problem. We just sort of go about, well, this is what New York offers. This is what is happening, right? Like I'm just a part of a system that I can't change. But realizing that, there's people that are behind this that impacted, that's where it really lights a fire for me.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. I mean, yeah, the stories that I've heard and even with my cousin, I mean, growing up in the 80s and 90s and just there was nothing. It's so sad to think that that still happens to families today in 2000. We're about to be in 2026. That's still happening.
Definitely.
It's so saddening to me.
Yeah. especially in the age of the internet where like I mean, I know you work with, I think Ghana, right? Is that where you're like
Yes.
just everything is so much more connected now, and yet people miss that information all the time. Like that shouldn't still be happening, especially with, like you said, educating a strong early childhood staff, people working with these kids. Plus the internet, we should be unstoppable. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It just goes to show how much more as a civilization we really need to be able to grow to be
Yes. I mean,
able to.
self-actualization is always the goal, but you're always climbing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. It's so fascinating. And I love having these conversations because I think about this stuff in my own mind, my own reflections. But then when you start talking out
I
loud
was
and
gonna say you have a busy mind too, or like
yes, right. I'm like, oh my gosh. But then when you start talking to somebody who has a different experience but the same experience,
Mhm.
it's so eye-opening. And you think, oh my gosh, we're in the same country, but
Right.
there's so many differences in the states and what states provide, and just your experience with two different states. It's really fascinating, and I just feel like, wow. So we have so far to go, but we've made it. We've gone farther, and we just have more to go. So I think if we all work together, we can eventually, get there.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you creating, platforms for conversation. And it's been really, pleasure getting to know you and meeting you because I love following you, but seeing you, through the video is really cool. Just being able to be two people sharing, experiences and hope for change.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Thank you for talking with me. It's been a really lovely conversation, and hopefully we can do it again.